Hello, hey, back again for an introduction to philosophy, looking at the Presocratics. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Hopefully I can make this video about 8 minutes to 9 minutes. I don't really want it to be more than that. But kind of looking at the Presocratics are going to be a buildup for trying to understand Plato and Aristotle. And so I'm going to skip through much of this Greek mythology and the origins. You can kind of look at that, kind of skipping over a little bit of the teasers to Eastern philosophy as well. Just suffice it to say, there's some parallels with Eastern philosophy that originated separately from the ancient Greeks. Skipping through some of the Sophos stuff as well. The thing I really want to hone in on here is Thales, Heraclitus, and Pythagoras, I believe. I'm going to go back to Thales here. The thing I want you to notice about this, and you're going to see in these slides, and maybe even in any reading that you do, is that in ancient Greek philosophies, when you look at the Presocratics, there's this debate about how do we know things, number one, but also as they're looking at the world, they're trying to figure out how do you explain the world, or what are some things that actually explain everything. And so one of the things that Thales proposes here, and he says this is an example of monism, is that this one process or one structure or one substance for him is water, right? And so why would he think that? Well, there's water in all sorts of things. Water is necessary for many things to exist and live. And so just by his observations, you can see why he would land on water as being the thing that explains everything else. And so what is the one over the many? For Thales, it's water, right? And so there's going to be some contrast with that too. You might think, well, what good thinking to help you think well is, well, what is one thing that doesn't need water? Well, that would maybe, in a good person in ancient Greek times would say, well, what about fire? Does fire have water? Well, if fire doesn't have water in it, then water doesn't explain everything. So it's deficient in its view in terms of explaining everything, right? And so that's the way you think through things logically, looking for something as a counterexample to what water is. But if there is one thing that explains everything and you think that's the case, that makes you a monist. And the debate going on here is, what is the one thing that explains all the many different things, right? And so if you think there's one thing, you're a monist. If you think there's two things, you're a dualist. That's a simple way. If you don't think there's only two things, you're a dualist. But if you think there are more than one thing, you could be a dualist, but you'd be called a pluralist, right? So pay attention to those things as well when we talk about those. Shows the contrast. Again, Anaximander, again, contrast, but he kind of goes abstract. So in one sense, you're trying to see what the one thing that explains everything. But then if you go and you say, well, look, there are these tangible, there's this tangible universe. What is the one thing that explains everything there? Well, some people might say, well, nothing in the tangible physical universe explains everything. So let's go abstract. Let's go something intangible. And you get Anaximander kind of going that reason or some sort of abstract notion explains everything. And he calls that the apeiron, right? So the boundlessness of the world. That's him trying to explain it through a abstract means. And again, the Chinese things kind of come up here. Anaximenes comes up. Not going to spend a lot of time on him, but again, he proposes air, right? And so now you're starting to get these different elements, the four elements: earth, wind, fire, water. And then you may have heard of the word quintessential. What's the fifth essential thing that actually does bring all these things together, right? And kind of a contemporary view of that would be, what is the theory of everything? What is the theory that binds all the theories in science together? A search for something like that, right? But that's kind of happening here with ancient Greek philosophy as well. Heraclitus is one I'll hone in on a little bit too, but Heraclitus is known for a phrase that says everything is in flux. And so as he looks at the world, he sees, look, everything is constantly changing. How do I know anything if everything's changing? How can I have any type of knowledge that doesn't change from moment to moment, right? And so he tries to, again, go abstract a little bit, and he talks about the logos, or the reason, the rule according to which all things are accomplished, and the law which is found in all things, right? What is this this logos that does that as a pursuit of him and that thought? Because he sees that everything is constantly changing. He wants to see what unifies that. Okay, I'm going to skip through Pythagoras is important because he starts to introduce mathematical concepts into that. And so you've heard of Pythagoras and Pythagorean theorem. But again, the thing that does that is an example of logos, but it's this rational aspect that is accounted for in everything through mathematical reasonability. Parmenides, again, contrast to Heraclitus's notion. He thinks that the change that occurs is only an illusion, that there's a real reality, but all those changes are just an illusion. And so you begin to set up a difference between what is appearance and what is reality. And so he's kind of the author of that coming into place. But in that, what is the one? What is the theory of existence that overarches this? The ontology, as we talked about in previous slides. This is kind of the question that comes up to this. And again, I go a flashback to Eastern philosophy. You've heard of Zeno's paradox, is that you can't consistently divide the distance between one point and another point, or a person and a destination. By only going halfway, you'll never get there. That creates a paradox, but again, it shows some of the different kind of thinking and logical thinking that kind of occurs with the Presocratics. Empedocles comes up here. Again, he tries to overarch that problem with gaps between things by saying that life is a plenum without gaps. There are no gaps between things. So just a response to that. Exagoras comes on the scene, but he starts to talk about the idea of a nous, or a mind that sits behind everything, and the rational order that is brought to the world is seen through a mind of some sort. That's going to be a foreshadowing of Plato a little bit too, but he also says that each thing has seeds of itself in other things. So that's basically it. You get some teachings of Buddha here that kind of mimic that as well. And the last thing is atomism, that basically says the only thing that really does exist is the material universe, and that material universe is made up of small particles of minute indivisible things. And so the rest of the things between that is just void. And so you can see how there's this, at least the nascent little view of what materialism is, that matter is the makeup of everything. And so you see that in this slide. Those are the main things I want you to get, is that you've got this contrast between different views of what makes up the world, monism, dualism, pluralism, but then you also have this contrast between how do you explain it either with physical things and that being sufficient to explain everything, but maybe there's this abstract notion, this non-physical explanation of everything that we see as physical. There's a dualistic aspect to that, but also the introduction that there's a mind, or there's this rationality behind the world as well, that leads into a build up to Plato and what you're going to hear from him. All right, I'm going to stop there, but we'll talk more as you unpack and head into Plato.